Good evening. Good to see everybody. Good to be back with you as always. Appreciate the invitation every time. And I know Greg's off doing something I don't know that I could do, spend a week with a bunch of kids, but he's got more energy than most of us, I think. So tonight I wanted to talk about, I hope everybody had a great day, and dads especially, that the children were nice to you. We had a house full, and it was great to have them. It was sort of great to have them gone, but it was great to have them. And hope you had one as well. But let's think about something else tonight. Think about when you turn on the TV and you start watching the news. What happens? How many of you sort of experience some anxiety, some stress, a little bit of worry? That something happens that we have no control over. Things that happen that sort of sneaks up on us. Our body gets tense. Our mind gets to racing and running around. Our muscles tighten up, and a peaceful state of mind that we had sort of eludes us for a while. When you watch the news, what do you see? Well, David in his prayer talked about the violence we've had recently. The war we have going over across in Europe. The inflation that's striking the United States, the shortages of different things that we need, the prices that are affecting us all. Those kinds of things, they upset us. And they will sort of wear on us. And it gets to the point where sometimes we just don't know what to do. And we start to think about them, and they start to sort of occupy most of our thought, and we realize we're not going to get where we want to be. And that's when it gets dangerous. When we start thinking that way. This immense amount of pressure that sometimes we're under, that we're not going to get what we want. That things are not going to be done the way we want them to be done. When we're threatened with losing things that we like to have, what do we do? What are we going to do? Anxiety is something that naturally occurs. Everybody, at one time or another, is going to experience some kind of anxiety, some kind of worry. But if we repeatedly let those worries, let those cares, let that stress, stress us out and affect us emotionally, there's going to be a terrible effect. And the main thing that we're worried about, that I'm worried about tonight, and that I want us to talk about, is how is that going to affect us as Christians? How is that going to affect us the way we deal with our fellow man? Are we going to become distracted? Are we going to become ineffective as Christians? Are we going to get to the point where we miss our purpose as disciples in Christ because we're overly concerned with all of these other things? As a disciple of Christ, we have to worry about those things to the point that we don't worry about them. Now that's sort of an oxymoron, but think about that for a second. Solomon said an anxious heart weighs us down. See, it's not good for us. It's something that slows us up. Sometimes in the frantic rush to get everything that we need or everything that we think we want, get our way, the peace of God eludes us. And we need to get back to understanding what that is. Roxanne and I, this time of year, I know a lot of people are doing these kinds of things. Friday, we're leaving on a short little vacation. I say it's a vacation. We're actually going out to Red River, New Mexico, to the Red River Family Encampment, which is 3 days of intense Bible study. And you would think, that sounds great. That's pretty good. About 20 different speakers, some great men, scholars of the Bible are going to be talking and teaching classes. I'm looking forward to it. But, there's a little worry that goes along with it. How am I going to get out there? How much is gas going to be in New Mexico? Where are we going to stay once we get there? And the most important thing is, where are we going to eat? And then Roxanne, of course, the most important thing is, well, what do we wear while we're out there? And I think she worries more about what I'm going to wear than what she wears. She doesn't want me to embarrass anybody. But even though something that's good, we turn it into something that sort of concerns us and worries us. in those everyday things, our job, you know, our family, our children, our finances, all those drive us to sometimes be anxious and weigh us down. And when you compile a list sort of like that, and that was just a short one, you know, it increases that stress. It increases that worry. In the Gospel of Luke, though, we have a story. The one you're familiar with, and this is Jesus in the house of Mary and Martha. You know, and this is where somebody is really busy to the point that they get stressed out. And remember that word stressed out, what we use all the time, it means distressed. This is someone that's in distress. And if you read that, well, it says, now it happened that they went and he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, Lord, you do not care that my sister has left me to serve alone. Therefore tell her to help me. And Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled by many things. But one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her. You know, we understand what Jesus is saying here, what he's telling Martha about Mary. It's easy to see. What he's saying is, you're going to enjoy life, Martha, a lot more if you'll simply focus just on what's needed. Focus on that. You know, Martha was saying, Lord, tell her to help me. You know, Lord, you don't care about what I'm doing. You don't care how hard I'm working, and that my sister has left me to do this all alone. Tell her to help me. Martha was experiencing anxiety, rushing around, trying to get everything. And she was thinking to herself, nobody cares how busy I am. Nobody cares what I'm having to do. Mary, you know, you're going to sit there. Don't bother to get up. I'll serve the refreshments. I'll bring in the food. I'll go out in the kitchen and I'll do all the hard work. You just stay here and talk. You just have your nice little chat, and I'll do all the work alone. See, stress is our alarm system. Stress is what triggers us. It says, you know, there's something here, something going on. And as I said earlier, no one lives without some degree of stress. You know, you may think, well, it's going to take something big, it's going to take a serious illness, it's going to take something like that for me to feel stressed. Well, that's not true. You know, it's this physical and mental reaction. Sometimes it's as simple as trying to cross the street at a busy intersection. Maybe it's when we're too hot or too cold in the house. You know, maybe it's something that's even good for us, that we experience joy, but it activates this defense mechanism. You know, it's not necessarily bad for us. In fact, some say we need a little stress, that's sort of the spice of life sometimes. But it can be caused by anything that changes or anything that creates a state of alarm, a state of arousal about what's going on, mobilizes our body against it. And so Christ knew this was what was happening to Martha. And this is not something, you know, this is not a psychology lesson tonight. This is a lesson from the Scriptures. Christ knew this happens to all of us. It's addressed several places in the New Testament. We're going to look at a couple tonight. You know, when our environment changes and we feel threatened or challenged, then our body reacts in a negative way. And so stress can come about by anything that mobilizes that defense. It's worry, it's emotional. Something that annoys us, that scares us, that hurries us, that angers us, that frustrates us. And it maybe challenges us. It doesn't have to be some big tragedy. It could be any of those things. It's caused by anything pleasant or unpleasant. You know, they say the two of the greatest stressors in our lifetime is number one, when we get married, and number two, when we retire. Now, those are supposed to be joyous occasions. But they said those are two of the most stressful times in our lifetime. I want you to think about a rubber band. Take a rubber band and just take it out of the box and just hold it there and look at it, you know, and put no pressure on it, then it's going to stay that way. But the minute you start to stretch it, when you pull on it, when you put that outside pressure on it, when you let go, it needs to go back to that relaxed state just the way you found it. But if you do it long enough and hard enough and it's often enough, pretty soon you stretch it and it stays stretched. Or eventually it might even break. If we do that for a long time, it'll snap. So any time can be a period of major stress in our life, just like that rubber band. And it's pretty hard sometimes to not do that. See, I wouldn't be surprised right now if a few of you are sitting out there tonight dreading tomorrow morning, Monday morning. Got to get up and go to work. Already not looking forward to it. You're already stressing about it. Maybe some of you are sitting out there right now making your to-do list, what you're going to do when you get home tonight. When Larry shuts up, I got things to do. You're already starting to look at those kinds of things. It's a difficult time. It's a difficult time in our history. So what does the Bible say? Well, Paul writes a few things. He says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. You want to overcome stress? Don't be anxious about things. Do what? Give it to God. Pray to God. Petition Him. Peter said, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. See, you're not in this alone. Martha thought, I'm in this alone. Nobody is going to help me. I've got to do this myself. There is no one here to help. Christ Himself said, I tell you, do not worry about your life or what you will eat or drink or about your body or what you will wear. Is not life more important than food and the body more important than clothes? Matthew 6:25, Sermon on the Mount. He goes on just a little later to say, do not worry, what shall we eat or what shall we drink or what shall we wear? For the pagans, unbelievers, run after these things, and your heavenly fathers know you need them. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Anxiety and worry, even though they come naturally to us, as Christians, we have a defense mechanism. We have an attitude that says, I can control all of this because I have the Father on my side. I have someone here who really controls things. So God commands us. You need to start recognizing the sources of those things that bring you anxiety and those things that weigh you down and those things that stop you from being effective as a Christian. Get rid of them. You should not let those things control your life. In Matthew chapter 8, Christ gives us an example about how He dealt with it. How He dealt with stressful things. And if anyone ever had the right to feel stressed, if anyone ever had the right to be overcome with anxiety, it was Christ. There in Matthew chapter 8, it tells us how that He was constantly encircled by people. There was always a crowd around Him. There were always people wanting to touch Him. There were always people wanting to talk to Him. There were always people looking at Him, asking Him questions. He was constantly exposed to that. And you think about the fatigue and how tired you would get of that. The press of the crowd, asking to be healed. And in one place there in Matthew chapter 8, somebody asked Him about following Christ. Said, you don't want to follow me unless you're willing to give up everything, because I don't even have a house. I don't even have a home. The foxes have a home. The birds have a nest. I don't have anything. That was His life. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were always picking at Him, trying to trap Him, trying to get Him to do something that He shouldn't do. And then His own disciples were always sort of fussing and fighting themselves. Who's the greatest? Which one of us is the greatest, Christ? Tell us. We want to know. Things like that. They didn't understand what was going on. They were competing for His attention. So He had all these pressures on Him. And yet, He also knew the ultimate end of things. He knew what awaited Him. He knew about His death beforehand. He knew His ultimate destiny, His arrest, the beatings, the crucifixion. He knew that was coming. And yet in all of that, we never see Christ as someone who sort of appears to be not Himself. Someone who appears to be out of control. Someone who appears to be overwhelmed. No, he always seems to be in control. Never worried, never anxious, totally confident, totally in control. Well, how did he do that? Well, he gives us some principles there in Matthew chapter 8. And I'm not going to read that chapter for respect of time, but you know, he said a couple of times, Christ said, I just have to get away. In Matthew chapter 8 and verse 18, he says, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Jesus at times would just get away. He would go out by himself. When the crowds were too much, he got in the boat and he went out to sea. He went over to the mountainside. He got away from everybody where they couldn't get to him. And he would rest, and he would pray, and he would meditate, and he would just be alone. And he would find time to be still and know that he is God. You know, if we find ourselves filled with stress, we should realize that sometimes it's because our priorities aren't right. Our priorities are out of whack. We're worried about the wrong things, sort of like Martha was. You know, in Matthew chapter 8, a little further on, another guy comes up and says, I'll follow you, but I want to go bury my father first. Well, that seemed like a reasonable request. You know, the Jews were very big on burying their parents. They usually did it very quickly because of, you know, they didn't have the embalming and things that we have today. But Christ says, you know, let the dead bury the dead. That seems sort of harsh. But, you know, he couldn't wait a few days for this man to go bury his father. First of all, we're not sure his father was dead. In fact, most think he was not. This man may have been asking for an unknown amount of time, maybe for years to come before his father died. And yet, Christ was saying, you know, if you're going to follow me, you got to give up everything. Priority is not your father. Priority is me. Priority is preaching my word. And this man says, no, let me do what I want to do first, my priority, and then I'll follow you. Christ says, that's not the way it works. I want you to follow me now. There's nothing more important than that. See, when we realize that in our life, our stress level goes down. When we realize that all we have to do is follow Christ first, we don't worry about a lot of other things. When our priority is Him first, those other things disappear. You know, this man said, if you let me do what I want, then God will get my attention. Well, if we give God our attention, then we don't have room for anything else. We don't have room for other things to get in our way and to stress us out. Jesus taught there in that Sermon on the Mount that anxiety comes about by worrying about the wrong priorities. What was their priority? What we're going to eat, what we're going to drink, what we're going to eat, clothes we're going to wear. He says, why are you worrying about that? That's what the world worries about. You need to worry about me. You need to worry about pleasing my Father. You should be different. See, when everybody else is worried about these things, we are seeking His kingdom first. You know, and His righteousness, He says, and these things will be given to you as well. If you got your priority right, your stress level goes down. Well, how can I get that into my life? How can I set my priorities right? What do I have to do that? How will I know if I've got them in the right place? Well, when you're faced with situations that you can't handle, they're just a little bit too big for you, they're a little bit too much, do you focus on yourself? Or do you try to handle it yourself, which is going to result in stress and anxiety and worry and anger maybe? Or do you turn to God? Do you look to God? Do you ask His help in dealing with those kinds of things, with that frustration? How many of you like to drive in Dallas traffic? Now, for an old country boy, you know, from Clare, Oklahoma, Dallas is a big town. And I don't like to drive in that traffic. And Roxanne can tell you it stresses me out. When I don't know exactly where I'm going and where I should turn and how the road goes and those kinds of things. But you know, I have to have some faith in some things. I got to have faith in the signs. I got to have faith in that GPS maybe that I'm using now. You know, I got to have faith in that backseat driver that never fails me. Well, never maybe too much, but usually doesn't fail me. You know, those are the kinds of things I have to have. Faith. Well, same thing in our life. There's things that we don't like. There's things that are going to be upsetting to us. But we have to have faith that says He's going to guide us. He's going to lead us. He's going to tell us how to act. He's going to tell us what to say. He's going to tell us what to do. He's going to show us the way. Now, we just read what Peter said there. Cast your care on Him because He cares for you. Now, there's going to be times when we're faced with things we can't control. We can't change. We can't do anything about it. We're overwhelmed by it. And yet He says, cast your anxiety, cast your care on Him. You know, even if the situation doesn't change, even if the worst happens, He says, God still understands and God still cares for you. He's still going to get you through it. We've seen what anxiety and stress can do to people. I asked Chris to lead that song, Take Time to Be Holy. And I appreciate the hoops he jumped through to get it up there for us tonight. But, you know, certainly as children of God, we are to be holy. We are to take the time to be holy. We're to be holy in our conduct. Peter says we are to be holy because God is holy. You know, He's called us to be holy. It's written, be holy for I am holy. That song says the world rushes on. The world continues to move. The beginning there of that second verse, it says the world rushes on. Our lives are hectic. Our lives are fast-paced. We've got those activities that consume our time. And James says our life is but a vapor. And before we know it, time has slipped by. So it takes time, though, for us to be holy. That song, the presumption of that song is holiness is something we are going to pursue. Something we are going to go after, that we desire and want to be holy people. And if we have that desire to be holy, and the Scripture says those that are holy will see the Lord. That's a great thought. That's a great comfort. That as we strive to be holy, that we can see God, that we can be there, that the fruit of our service is to be with God. We're told that holiness has to be perfected. In other words, we have to work at it. We have to make it better and better and better. But if we're not careful, the time to develop that holiness slips away. And we become like the world, and it rushes on. So what does that song tell us? Well, it says, first of all, spend time with the Lord. You know, the song encourages us. It says, abide in Him always. Spend much time in secret with Jesus alone. It was talking about prayer. You get stressed out, pray. It's very simple. Pray. Have you ever prayed about a problem and not felt better after that prayer? Speak oft with the Lord, forgetting in nothing His blessings to seek. See, when we're stressed out, seek His blessings. Study His Word. Next line in that song says, and feed on His Word. You know, do you take the time to do that? Do you look at what He says? Do you desire the pure, sincere milk of the Word as we're commanded to desire? So do you go to His Scriptures regularly, routinely? Now, you can't overestimate the power that has on our life. When we spend time with God in His Word, when we spend time with God in prayer, you know, then He says there's another thing. Spend some time with others. That's talking about fellowship. Make friends of God's children. That's what the early Christians did. If we look at Acts chapter 2, we see how that they were together, how they continued steadfastly together. Hebrew writer says it helps us ensure our faithfulness and our steadfastness, how it encourages us. Hebrews chapter 10 talks about how that we need to assemble together to encourage and help one another. It talks about our service to one another. You know, help those who are weak. Service to our fellow man. If you're helping someone else, your problems usually seem less. When you look at someone else who's in worse shape than you are and needs your help, your problems diminish. So he says, help those who are weak. That's a duty that all Christians have. Galatians 6 and 10 says that service is to be to everyone, especially those in the household of faith. Help each other. Minister to one another. Don't get too busy to do that. We shouldn't say we don't have the time to be with the brethren. We don't have time to assemble together. We don't have time to help. He says, as we have opportunity. And as we do these things, a transformation slowly takes place. We start to see God's blessings, how it benefits us. What's the song say? Be calm in thy soul. Again, those anti-stress things. Be calm in your soul. Through prayer, through study, through meditation. He says, and we're going to get this renewed strength, each thought and each motive beneath his control. So he's talking about our relationship with Christ. As our relationship with Christ builds, our stress level decreases. Our anxiety decreases. When we think about the gift of the Holy Spirit, how it helps us, we increase in our realization of God's love. Led by his Spirit to fountains of love. See, God is going to help. We're going to produce that fruit of love. Is that not sufficient motivation to take time to be holy? Does that not motivate us to be holy? Because he says, look, you're going to be more like Christ. That's the ultimate goal of being his disciples. The song says, like him thou shalt be. Jesus said the disciple is to be like the teacher in Luke 6 and 40. God says we are to be like his son. And this transformation is going to be noticed by other people. Thy friends in thy conduct, his likeness shall see. The result of spending time with Jesus, and we can look at people like Peter and John, and we can see how that their time with Jesus made them better people, made them different. So when he tells us, Paul says in 1 Timothy 4 and 15, meditate on these things, give yourself entirely to them, that your progress may be evident to all. Your friends and your conduct will see him. We're going to serve God. And so as we serve God, these are the kinds of things we need to do. We are prepared for greater service. Thou soon shalt be fitted for service above. See, isn't that the goal of being holy? Fitted for service above. To be with God in heaven, to reign with Christ and God forever. Is that again not more motivation to take time to be holy? And as we take that time, we become better people. And we become people who are not stressed. We are not anxious. We are not worried. We know the outcome. We know what's going to happen. Let's look quickly back to Martha. Martha was distracted with this preparation. She was distracted with being alone in all of this. And she was starting to sort of complain. She was letting somebody know about it. Isn't that what we do? Doesn't that sound like us? And Christ says, but this one thing is needed. Martha, there's just one thing you need. You're filling your day up with all these other things you think you need. These things that you assume you need, that are distracting you, that are unnecessary, and you've missed the point. Peter Drucker was a man who wrote a lot of management kind of books back in the last century. And he says, it's not so much that we get hung up on priorities, but he says it's the things that we leave out, that we miss. He says we get hung up trying to do it all, and we miss the point. And that's sort of the real problem here. We're making priorities out of things that aren't really priorities. See, Christ wasn't concerned with food. He wasn't concerned with how the presentation of the meal was going to be. That was not what he was about. And Mary understood that. See, the answer for us is to be like Mary. What was the one thing that was needed? He said, look, Mary has chosen that good part. What had Mary chosen to do? Be with Christ. Listen to him. You know, be there with him. She realized spending time with Jesus was more important than these external things, this external preparation. And so what he was telling her is, you know, what Martha was doing wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. It was, you know, having a meal was fine. But what he was simply saying was it wasn't the wisest choice. It wasn't the smart choice. The smart choice was to be with him. Jesus was there. Right there with him. And Mary says, I'm going to take this opportunity to learn from him, to be with him. That's the one thing that was needed. So the thing that we need to do is spend more time with Jesus in a personal, intimate, loving relationship, learning about him through his word, learning all we can on how he would act, what he would do, what he would say, what he wants for us. We never should get too busy with outward things that bring on this stress, that we neglect the quiet, peaceful time with Jesus. Those quiet, peaceful times with Jesus, maybe in worship together like tonight, or maybe when we're alone at home. You know, in the midst of all that, find the calmness, like Mary did, of simply focusing on what's needed. What we need to do. Here's a good place to start. Cross out everything that takes away from the real meaning of Christianity. Now that's easier said than done. But cross out everything that takes away from the real meaning of your walk as a Christian. If it's an obstacle that's getting in the way, take it out. And that applies just to our everyday life. You know, do you really need to go to Walmart tomorrow? That's one of the biggest stressors I know. You know, do you really need to mow that yard when it's 110 degrees outside? Are those some things that can be rescheduled, put out differently, done differently? You know, lay out a plan. Think about it. State your expectations up front. What's the main thing that's needed for me as a Christian to be doing? Is it more important for me to mow the yard or to be in prayer? Is it more important for me to go fishing or to come to worship? You know, is it more important for me to go to the store, or is it more important for me to be studying God's Word? Now we know those things have to be done. But is it the priority? You know, share the load. Others will help. Mary here probably would have helped, but look at the way Martha's timing was off. We need to lighten our calendar every once in a while. Do we have things scheduled that we don't need to do? What's optional? And here's another one that gets into us a lot. Look at the budget. You know, money is one of the biggest stressors that we have. And put your significant relationships at the top of the list. And first of all, that's Christ. You know, seek him first. Personal time with him, worshiping him at church, time with your spouse. You know, Roxanne and I, people always saying, you guys are on the go all the time. You're always going somewhere. Well, we do, because we enjoy that. When we're sitting alone at home, you know, we're going to get on each other's nerves. But if we get in the car and take off, we don't do that. We enjoy traveling. We enjoy being out together. You know, so learn those kinds of things. Family, don't neglect your family obligations. Family is important. Honor your family. Christ said we are to take care of each other, take care of our family. Look at our closest friends, how we should be with them. Look for the spiritual dimension in things. How can I help? What can I give? What should I be doing? How can I pray for someone, help someone? All those things. Focus on those who are in need instead of ourselves. See, life doesn't have to be the most stressful thing in the world. When we think like Mary, we focus only on what's needed. And that's our relationship with Christ. In Matthew chapter 11, Christ says, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden." That's stressed, right? "I will give you rest." That's the answer. "Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He says, here's what you need to do. Come to me. Take my yoke. Follow me. Let me lead you and learn from me. When we do that, the world's going to rush on, but we don't rush with it. It's not going to carry us along with it. Our time on this world is short, so our priorities have to be right, have to be straight. So are you taking the time, are you making the time to spend it in prayer, to spend it in God's Word, to spend it in fellowship, to spend it in serving others? We have to make that time. And we will if we desire that. If we desire to come to Him, and to take from Him, and to learn from Him, we'll experience the blessings that He offers. I will give you rest. So we become more like Christ, and He gives us rest. That's our lesson tonight. Hope you benefited from it. If you need to answer our invitation, whatever reason, we invite you to come as together we stand and as we sing.